War after war. You old feudal parasites, you just sacrifice the poor. You got the cutting-edge weapons, but your scam's still the same as it's been since the Romans. Yo, it's the Patriot game. Yo, that's the war racket. It's the war racket. It's the war racket. That's the war racket. You twisters of language. You creeps of disguise.
Well, welcome back to Heroes and Patriots, a program about national security, intelligence, and foreign policy. It's 29 minutes past the hour. I'm with John SAKOWICZ, my co-host. This is Mary Massey, and we're going to welcome our second guest, John.
Yeah, I can't say enough good things about this organization. The Physicians for Social Responsibility is the U.S. affiliate of the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, which was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1985. So today on this show, we have two representatives from that organization. Right. It's just awesome that they've made time in their busy schedule for us. They're both physicians. They're both activists. I just can't thank them enough.
I'd like to introduce our next guest for this second segment. His name is Robert M. Gould. He's a doctor and graduate from Albert Einstein College of Medicine. And from 1981 until 2012, he worked as a pathologist at Kaiser Hospital here in San Jose, California. Since 2012, he has been an associate adjunct professor in the Department of Obstetrics, Gynecology, and Reproductive Sciences at the University of California, San Francisco School of Medicine, where he is a collaborator with the UCSF Program on Reproductive Health and the Environment. Since 1989, he has been president of the San Francisco Bay Area chapter of Physicians for Social Responsibility. And since 1993, he has been on the board of the national PSR, serving as the president both in 2003 and then again in 2014. He is on the board of the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, serving as North American co-vice president, and we're going to talk a lot about that. Since 1986, Bob Gould has been a leader of the Peace Caucus of the American Public Health Association, for which he has been chairperson for numerous years. And in 2009, he received the prestigious Seidel Levy Peace Award. Since 1995, Bob has been a leading member of the Environmental Committee of the Santa Clara County chapter of the California Medical Association, and through this work has authored and submitted numerous environmental health resolutions adopted by the California Medical Association as policy. And for his work within CMA, he received the Santa Clara County Medical Association Outstanding Contribution in Community Service and the Outstanding Contribution to the Medical Society. Dr. Gould, we welcome you to the program.
Well, thanks so much for having me, and it's a delight to be on the show and to share the hour with Dr. Kirch, my good friend and colleague.
Right. If you could speak a little closer to the microphone that you're using, that would help us hear you just a little bit better. Thank you for joining us. John, you wanted to start us off this half hour.
Yes. Again, thank you, Dr. Gould, for agreeing to be on the show. We were speaking with Dr. Kirch about global warming, and a lot of times it's not obvious the connection between global warming and war. One of my favorite commenters on this subject is Christian Parenti, who is the author of Tropic of Chaos, Climate Change and the New Geography of Violence, who wrote The Growing Crisis of War and State Breakdown in the Middle East is partially driven by climate change. We have to deal with climate change that is drastically reduce greenhouse gas emissions or face escalating chaos, escalating war. And he uses Syria as a prime example. Why don't you comment on that?
Well, I think you're really getting at a heart of the issue that we really need to look at in terms of framing what are going to be the possibilities for reducing the conflicts of nuclear war as well. I mean, in terms of your citation of Christian Parente, I'm reminded also of the work of Michael Clare of Blood and Oil, whereby we have an international system. My belief is that much of our global economy is unfortunately, particularly with reference to the Mideast, has circulated around this central circuit of military interventions, control over oil, largely the U.S., but certainly our allies and some of our competitors, and that competition for oil, which is then pumped and to generate petrodollars, buy arms to continually perpetuate conflict in the Middle East and elsewhere. These are exactly the sort of forces that lead to more war, more pumping of fossil fuels, more dislocation of people, all increasing the dangers that are posed by global warming to our global community. So there's a definite interaction there. On the other side of things, but clearly connected as well, are scenarios that we within Physicians for Social Responsibility and other organizations have been talking about at this type of heightened conflict, say, for example, in the area of South Asia, where we've had long-time hostility between India and Pakistan. Even a small regional nuclear conflict that could that could involve up to, say, 100 Hiroshima-sized weapons, relatively small weapons compared with the current nuclear arsenals, could lead through destruction of cities in India and Pakistan and combustion of cities, lead to so much soot and debris rising into the atmosphere that we could block out sunlight and lead to global cooling. This is an accelerated, updated scenario that Carl Sagan in his famous work on nuclear winter decades ago. Now, as I mentioned to our students at UCSF and Stanford, I'm not advocating detonation of nuclear weapons as a solution to global warming, but this is just to illustrate there are other ways to deal with global warming, as Dr. Kirsch has illustrated very well. But it just illustrates the interconnections between warfare, global warming, and severe climate disruption in either direction. And the latter scenario that's been written about in Science and other major journals could lead to major falls in global temperatures that could lead to widespread malnutrition from the collapse of rice, maize, and wheat production that could lead to anywhere from 1 billion to 2 billion people perishing from malnutrition. So we have immense challenges ranging from our continued addiction to fossil fuels up through the weaponry that we employ up to nuclear weapons to guarantee that access or at peril to our survival as a species.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. We, in our very self-interested way, we think of climate as it affects us, be it affecting wildfires or our parents say supercharging hurricanes, our retired parents in Florida. But it's really the third world that is suffering, that will suffer the most with climate change, with drought and just other disasters. Do you want to talk a little bit about how things really aren't equitable with climate change, that really the world's poor will suffer the most?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head on this. I mean, it's the most, it's the people made vulnerable by our global capitalist system worldwide, all the way down to the populations made vulnerable, as Dr. Kirsch has illustrated. Here at home, the least resilient folks are going to be the most vulnerable to these major changes in the Earth's carrying capacity, the ability to produce food, to withstand the disasters from rising sea levels, et cetera, that the heat waves, we're already seeing this happen in front of our eyes, and we're already seeing this exacerbate the vulnerability of populations, particularly people of color, to the COVID pandemic, which may well be the first of many pandemics that can arise within our disordered system, particularly as we continue to cut down forests and impinge upon the wild, where we could have additional scenarios where organisms could spread to human beings and have future pandemics. So there's a lot of intersectionality of these issues that put us at the risk.
Dr. Gould, Dr. Kirsch had mentioned the expense that it takes to run nuclear energy just to power our homes, etc. But let's talk about the expense in maintaining a nuclear fleet, if you will, and submarines and so forth, an arsenal in preparation for nuclear war. Can you address that and tell our listeners more about that? And
how your organization is stepping in to call attention to it.
Sure. Well, a good starting point is looking at our own plans in the United States to modernize our nuclear weapons. And despite the rhetoric of President Obama to build for a world free of nuclear weapons, it was under the Obama administration and then accelerated in the Trump administration a 30-year project to modernize our nuclear weapons arsenal. That's been estimated by organizations such as the Congressional Budget Office and others to range anywhere from $1.2 to $1.7 trillion over the next 30 years. And that's a hard number to wrap one's brain around, but that comes down to anywhere between $4 to $6 million every hour over the next 30 years, which is certainly not chump change in terms of the challenges that we have if we really are serious about reducing our climate burdens and being able to, if you will, have something equivalent to a Manhattan Project, as Bill McKibben has suggested, to bring together all of the resources of our government, et cetera, to address climate change. Now, so some of the trade-offs are illustrative, particularly in terms of our current COVID pandemic. So the United States spent a little over $35 billion on nuclear weapons in 2019. And that's about half of our total budget, because that's not including the delivery systems and other maintenance functions for the Department of Energy and modernizing of programs. But just taking half of that overall expenditure, which is about twice as much as France and the United Kingdom combined, this could instead, in terms of looking at our current health needs, fund 300,000 beds in intensive care in the U.S., plus 35,000 ventilators, plus provide the salaries for 150,000 nurses and for 75,000 doctors. And, we could go through and, there are a number of the Center for Budget Priorities and other organizations provide the sorts of trade-offs that we could readily see in terms of the trade-offs between nuclear weapons expenditures and other things that are much more useful. And again, nuclear weapons expenditures are only a subset of the overall U.S. military budget, an essential part of it, of course. If we look at the overall military budget, in 2019, U.S. taxpayers paid $730 billion for the military budget, and that could have provided over 205 million adults with low-income health care for 1 year. Not the best health care, but still much more than many people in our country are provided with, or 308 million children with low-income health care as well. So, I mean, in a country that has so many people without health care, that has so many adults and children suffering in poverty and in hunger and homeless, we could do a lot better in terms of utilizing these types of funds for the social needs that need to be addressed.
Dr. Gould, we have a couple callers, so I'd like to turn to those now. Caller, if you can hear us, go ahead with your question.
Thank you. This has been really fascinating, Dr. Gould, and I wanted to go back to your comments about pandemics and ask, from the global response to the global threat that that reached every single human being on the earth, just like climate change will and nuclear war would, where do you see hope from the response to the global response to the COVID pandemic? And at the same time, where do you see despair? And how do you take lessons from both the hope and the despair that comes out of how countries around the world and international organizations have responded to the pandemic?
Well, we obviously haven't done enough, but, I personally think that our administration rejoining the World Health Organization and increasing the chances for global collaboration are very important. I think there are also other mechanisms that also aren't talked about a great deal that could also deal with the curbing the dangers of future biological threats. Unfortunately, our country and many around the world have abandoned the hope that was provided by efforts to try to strengthen the inspection and verification protocols of the Biological Weapons Convention, which itself could hopefully curb what continue to be dangerous experiments on organisms to increase the possible infectivity of organisms and such that are carried out around the world and in many facilities in our own country in what are called biological safety labs and BSL labs, particularly the high-level containment facilities, which we already know that organisms have escaped our own labs, and remains a possibility in terms of facilities that are deployed around the world, such as the Wuhan facility in China. So I think that, we have tools and treaties that allow us to develop a more collaborative approach in terms of climate, us rejoining the Paris Agreement is an important step. And in terms of nuclear weapons, I would say, and I didn't get to address this in the prior comment, there's a great deal of hope that's out there in terms of the progress made by the treaty to prohibit nuclear weapons, which was passed overwhelmingly by countries around the world at the UN towards the end of 2017, and now has 55 countries around the world who have ratified it, so it's gone into force. The challenge for us, and not only for us in the United States, but in all the other, the rest of the non-nuclear weapon states, is for people to organize within these countries to join the treaty so we can develop the global solidarity to be able to finally rid the world of nuclear weapons. So before I joined the call today, there was actually a wonderful webinar that's taking place, organized by Back from the Brink and the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, about the challenges to carry out this treaty. And we within PSR have been working with many other organizations within the United States within this Back from the Brink campaign, which has 5 major planks to get rid of the sole authority of the president to fire nuclear weapons, to take weapons off of alert status, which would allow weapons to be fired within a half an hour and destroy populations across the world, to declare no first use of nuclear weapons, to stop the nuclear weapons modernization project that I referenced earlier, and as well to have a verifiable treaty to ban nuclear weapons, such as the treaty to prohibit nuclear weapons. And, we've campaigned in many municipalities around the country. We have cities such as Los Angeles, Atherton, San Francisco, Eureka, and Arcata who've joined this campaign and passed resolutions. And in 2018, both houses of the California legislature declared their support for the Back from the Brink campaign and the treaty to prohibit nuclear weapons as well. So again, these are just illustrative of global movements that we're very optimistic about what that represents, but it's going to involve people joining with us, and I would call on people in Mendocino and Humboldt County to join this project as well.
Dr. Gould, we have another listener who would like to ask you a question. Caller, go ahead with your question, please.
Hey, I'm wondering if you can provide any advice over global movements in terms of divestment strategies. I'm having a really hard time having the conversation in my family about financial security and the fear of financial security related to things like the IRAs and the investments that we have. And I'm coming up against some real fear and brick walls in terms of options. And I would love to hear even your personal attempts at those solutions, and or any resources you could point someone to maybe look for a script of how to have that conversation and how to move in a more positive direction with change.
You know, excuse me, I'm just having what you're saying has just been cutting out for me. So, unless our host could hear you better, I would love to just be able to get the question better than I could receive it here.
Caller, are you still there?
I am.
So could you repeat your question a little more just directly, because you're breaking up?
Sure. I am looking at divestment strategies as a way to act with the climate organizations, and I'm wondering if you have any advice of divestment options.
Okay.
For example, you know, everyone who has these IRAs have a fear of financial security. If we pull that money out and put it somewhere else, you know, it becomes very difficult for some people to make that choice, even though they're making other good choices in their life. I'm just wondering if you might have maybe some personal directions that you've taken that you can advise someone, or resources you can point someone to in terms of divestment.
Thank you, caller.
You know, I think in terms of the divestment issues, I mean, at the personal level, there are, you know, people who have investments in certain funds. There are organizations who allow, you know, socially directed investments that don't go into tobacco companies or fossil fuels or weapons manufacturers. I don't have the specifics of those investment firms at the tip of my tongue. I would say, though, that at the core of your question is a very important one in terms of how do we particularly get the larger investors of pension funds and such out of fossil fuels, weapons, nuclear weapons, etc. And we within Physicians for Social Responsibility have been partnering with Fossil Free California in terms of providing health-based testimony with efforts that they're undertaking to go before CalPERS and CalSTRS, the various retirement funds, to be able to argue that these organizations should be taking their money away from fossil fuels and instead into renewable and sustainable fuels. As an example, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, which won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2017 and is one of our partners with Back from the Brink, It also has, and I would direct you to a report on their website, Don't Bank on the Bomb, which in a parallel way talks about, ways that people, or through their agents, whatever, could direct their investments away from the numerous corporations, that part of the military-industrial complex that builds nuclear weapons. So there are organizations that are very focused on this. I know that we in PSR right now are working together with some organizations on trying to go to health insurers, Cignas and others, Aetna, etc., and to say, hey, you're insuring health companies. This is morally irresponsible if you're investing in fossil fuel companies that are then driving global warming, air pollution that are impacting our patients and communities that we serve. So I'd be glad to follow up with you with more detailed advice through the station if possible.
Doctor, this has been a very sobering show. We've been talking about the two events that could cause global mass extinction: global warming and nuclear war. In the 1 or 2 minutes that we have left, please tell us how Physicians for Social Responsibility, which in part was awarded the 1985 Nobel Peace Prize, bring us up to date as to where your organization is working right now. What are your priorities? Is anybody listening? Are you getting the kind of platform that you want? Just give us a quick update as to where we are since 1985.
Well, in terms of the nuclear weapons issues, I would direct people to this wonderful project of the Back from the Brink campaign, and if you log on to preventnuclearwar.org, you can find the information on how to join that piece of it. And certainly our ongoing efforts, if you go to sakpsr.org, I would urge you to join us in our collateral efforts in terms of doing our utmost about global warming. I would say that a lot of our efforts, John, as well, beyond those campaigns, are very targeted at our younger generation of medical students, nursing students, and health professionals. One of our main charges as an educational and advocacy organization is to, for example, look at what is the standard medical curriculum in order to infuse standard curriculum on issues of global warming. For example, if somebody's learning about infectious diseases, we want our curriculum to be updated for our new generations to reflect our new understanding of what the climate-driving issues are on that. So a lot of our attention has been based on places like where we have roots in Stanford University Medical School, UCSF, UC Davis, UC Berkeley, where many of our members who are either faculty or general members are working with the next generation to educate them about this. And what we're finding, of course, is that younger people are pretty woke about many of these issues. They understand the dangers of climate change. It's a challenge for us to connect the issues of nuclear weapons, which they didn't grow up with, unlike Jan and myself and you all, as being on their mind. So that's sort of another challenge of connecting those issues. But I think success on all of our issues, whether it's our pervasive militarism and the nuclear weapons that are housed within that, and global warming and the vast array of associated environmental health threats, need to really be incorporated into the broader movements for social, environmental, and economic justice, which are very resonant with younger people. And it's a challenge to us to be able to integrate that with the social movements that will really be transformative here and around the world. And
Dr.
that's the
Gould,
challenge we have.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but we are out of time. This is live radio. We want to thank you for joining us for this 30 minutes and need to have you back perhaps even for a full hour. We've been speaking with Robert M. Gould, MD, who has been on both the state and national chapters of Physicians for Social Responsibility and has been on the board of the International Physicians for Prevention of Nuclear War. Thank you, Dr. Gould, for being with us.
Bob, we hope to have you back. We hope to have you back to the show, and thanks for all the great work you're doing.
Well, thank you all. It's been quite a pleasure for us.
You bet. That's our show for today.
And don't forget to support your community radio station, KMUD, by either becoming a member or an underwriter. This is your station. Thank you for listening.